welcome to the Sacred Commerce podcast. We're episode 3, and we're continuing to explore with Rowan Gabrielle. Hi, Rowan.
Hi, Immanuel. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. And what we're doing is we're exploring the book Sacred Commerce by Ayman Sawaf and Rowan Gabrielle, are awesome teachers and authors. And Ayman is joining us from the other side. Maybe he'll say something, maybe he won't. Rowan will let us know.
I do my best to merge with him before these.
Great.
See what will channel through.
Yeah. Well, I feel it. I feel it all the time. It's exciting to see you again. We're doing the 3rd podcast. We had a really nice first episode where we just kind of caught up with how things have been going for you over the last year since Ayman passed away. And then the second and then we kind of got started into some of the principles. And then last weekend, we jumped into the Age of Consciousness and got a bit into that. So we kind of jumped forward to the epilogue of the book, and we also spent some time getting into the most recent book that you and Ayman did and we're working on for the last 3 years before he passed away, called The Age of Consciousness. And we got into this idea that we have these epochs of time in human activity, and we keep the old ones don't go away. We just keep introducing new ones, new arcs of exploration and occupation that kind of take over even quicker, like the agricultural age going to the age of hunting and gathering, and the millennia of doing that, and then going into agriculture, then going into industry, then going into information, now going into the age of consciousness, and just a buzz of creativity and people doing yoga. And I mean, all these things that kind of seem like they're almost like sold out or something, like, it feels like ubiquitous. You're like, oh, they're bastardizing spirituality, but it's actually spirituality that's finding its way into everywhere. And everybody knows what namaste means. Everybody you could be, Christian. You may not like namaste, but you know what it is.
And it's happened so fast. I mean, it's basically the last 20 years,
Yeah.
And
yes.
It's like that. My friend Marco, he calls it the hockey stick effect. We got to here,
Yes.
and now that's it. It's mainlining.
Yep. Yes.
And
Yes.
it, like you said, it's every street corner. Meditation centers popping up everywhere now.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So we're here smack dab and getting into the Age of Consciousness, and now episode 3, we wanted to go down just deeper into this exploration of what is sacred commerce. What are the gifts of commerce? What's conscious commerce? What makes commerce sacred, and so on. So you made a really cool blog, not a blog post, it was an Instagram post the other day, and you really
It's
just
a what? It's an old one, that one, actually.
Is it?
But
Is it?
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
It's I just saw it, or I saw it again, and it's a really great guide. So we're following along with the book, obviously, and we are going into the chapters that have to do with sacred commerce and the 4th bottom line, and then that opens up into a whole second part around the merchant priesthood. And it feels like we've got a few things to get into, touch on again around gifts of commerce, conscious commerce. I kind of want to just prompt you and let you run and almost be like the teacher, lecturer for a little bit, and talk about what are the gifts of commerce, what's sacred commerce, 4th bottom line, all of that.
Sounds good. It always makes me a little nervous when you call me a teacher, but I kind of feel like more of a guide.
Yeah, okay. Well, sometimes as a guide, you will present lots of information.
It's true. It's true.
And sometimes as a guide, you might help guide in the integration of that information. And right now, just, kind of, sure, teach us
I'll do my best.
or
Yes,
share with us.
this I can do.
Well, let's just start with the idea of let's touch back in on the gifts of commerce. What are the gifts
Yeah.
of commerce? Like it's got a bad name, like everything's gone commercial, or but it's actually quite positive. And you share some ways that it's positive in the book, and just maybe you can go into a little bit of that now.
Yeah. I mean, we really talk about the gift of commerce being the gift of raising us out of our base chakras, out of our safety and our security needs. And
Hmm.
then obviously once you've gotten out of those safety and security needs, that's when you have the ability to pursue your creativity and your higher consciousness. So in the journey of spirituality, it's such an important piece to get to, because as long as you're just there, working to pay the rent and to feed your family and to feed yourself or whatever, you're never going to think about your higher consciousness or your own gifts. And so that's the first reason we call it a gift. It's because it's that gift of the freedom to pursue the more of who you are.
Yeah, and you also in the book said it's the gift of the goddess, a gift from the goddess. And why specifically the goddess? And because that does seem pretty specific.
That's true. And that was, Ayman always used to love to say that it was a gift from the goddess, because of the fact that it has so many feminine qualities. If you have that freedom, it nurtures you, it feeds you, all of those things that really come from the feminine. And so that's why he always felt it was really a gift from the goddess, that you would be able to have, greater freedom and greater ability to explore yourself. That's what a mother, and the goddess as mother, would want for her children, as that face of the goddess. So that's why he always liked to call it a gift from the goddess. And I think also he loved to do it just to like mess with people, because I think commerce is thought of as quite masculine in a way.
Right,
Business has
right.
been kind of in the masculine sphere, and actually its real gifts are very feminine. And so he
Right.
liked to just kind of like, spotlight that and make people feel a little uncomfortable by saying by crediting her for that gift.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of gifts or talents that would be considered more of feminine in terms of cooperative dynamics that, with business, I mean, unless there's some form of extreme business where, it's something out of the movies with organized crime, or not even out of the movies. I mean, obviously that
Yeah.
happens all the time where, you
Yeah.
know, you get an offer you can't refuse kind of a thing. But for the most part, what you're doing in business is you're arriving at win-win-win situations in an ideal world. You're creating um
When you
you're
have the sacred married with business, that is, you're always going for win-win-win. And I think that,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely, that's part of where the goddess really comes into it. It's
Yeah,
not
and
that.
being able to communicate, even use the tools of finding middle ground, even appreciating the other person's perspective, and looking for those broader ranging solutions for meeting needs.
Yeah. And
So
that's it. Yeah.
what makes and we have already started touching on it, but there's this idea of conscious commerce, sacred commerce, and you introduce the idea of the fourth bottom line. And why don't you talk first about, what's the triple bottom line versus the single bottom line, and then introduce the idea of the fourth bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea. So triple bottom line is, came in I guess, started really coming in about 30 years ago. And it was when people, chose to look at people, planet, profit, not just profit. So there was, for the first time, a triple bottom line, and people even started tracking that, and consumers started looking for that and wanting that. And, big companies like Whole Foods and Patagonia and these big brands that have really succeeded in that arena of conscious commerce started kind of rising and coming up. And what we kind of added in sacred commerce, and what we feel is the definer between conscious commerce and sacred commerce, is what we name the fourth bottom line, which is the return to self. And that is, how did you become more? How did you grow? How did you develop because of that business endeavor you did? How did it make you more of who you are? And when you're coming at business from that perspective, obviously you're going to be choosing business that's very much aligned with your destiny. You're not going to be doing something just for money, because that would be single bottom line, right? So it has to be something that's returning to you, to your community, to the planet you live on, and to your soul purpose. So the choice of what you would do business in is really narrowed and focused.
Yeah.
I remember a cousin of mine when I was young, phoning me when I first moved to the States, and I've got a great business opportunity for you. Like, you can make millions. I just need some contacts. Like, and we've got these cigarettes. They're really cheap, and we can just, like, the Americans will love them. Just. And I was like, I don't care how much cut you'll
Right.
give me on this deal. I can't give you even 1 second of my time. I love you as a
Right.
person. You're my cousin, but, like, my energy is not going to go to this deal,
Right.
like, call someone else, it's just not going to happen. Like, there's no amount of money you can offer me that's
Yeah.
going to have me selling cigarettes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, because and that's not to say necessarily that there are some sectors of business that are considered unsacred, because the truth is, you know, when we consume things, we're doing things because we kind of need them. Like, so energy isn't necessarily unsacred, but if you are putting lives and health and certain things at risk in the name of that, then it kind of goes over to the dark side. And
Absolutely. Yeah. And I wouldn't say, like, all people that sell cigarettes are bad at all. I mean, cigarettes have a place in our evolution. Absolutely. But for me, and who I already
yeah,
was
oh yeah, yeah,
at that point, it was like, my consciousness can't spend time doing that because it's here for
right.
other things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm
Yeah.
definitely not defending cigarettes per se. Like, oh, maybe certain types of natural tobacco. I don't smoke personally, but there's this just kind of presencing people to the idea that sacred doesn't necessarily mean that you have like, sacred commerce doesn't necessarily mean that you have a crystal shop, or that you, even that you're like trying to do um this normal life businesses. But you would essentially go for, if you're in food, you're going for a healthier, more whole food. You're not trying to just pass on processed foodstuffs. And so there's a kind of sense of, like, how is this helping, definitely the first bottom line of profit, because that's just kind of how businesses work. They don't, like a shark, a shark, if it stops swimming, it just dies. So we're not set up to just do nothing in our
Yeah.
commercial world. So there's got to be movement, and profit indicates movement, in terms of financial profit. But then you have this return to, the community, like you're saying, the people, and then to the planet in terms of our environment, which is really kind of a return to people. But it's couched in a more universal language. And then what you say is the return to self, I think of as capital S instead of small s. You're talking about what am I, when they say you can't take it with you, they're talking about everything but the things that you get in the fourth bottom line. Everything that comes in on the fourth bottom line at the soul level, you do take with you. It imprints in
That's
you,
a
and it's
great
either
point.
burning away karma, or it's setting yourself up for a really powerful next experience.
Yeah.
Those are the soul residue is what you do take with you, and that's why maybe it's the soul is still pretty abstract for a lot of people, but certainly not in our conversations here. And that's
And
something that, go ahead.
that's really part of why we say that business is an accelerator in that process, because
Hmm.
when you suddenly have like 14 and 24 and 50 people that you're interacting with, that's like a lot of mirrors. And if
Hmm.
you're taking it from the perspective of I create my own reality, then if you've got six of the people you work with mad at you over 1 week, you've got to be looking at like, whoa,
Hmm.
you know, like what's that reflecting? Is that about me being stronger, or is there some anger that I've just like buried and they're showing it to me? Or like you've got to do a little bit of work to find out what that message is.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, they're all angry. Like, no, it happened 6 times in one day,
Yeah.
and so that um growth process is really sped up. Like, one-on-one relationships, it is probably the biggest growth accelerator that we have. And so the
Yeah.
more of those one-on-one relationships we have, the faster that acceleration happens, because your feedback is just you know, so immediate.
Yeah.
And that's
And
exactly why we refer to it as a spiritual accelerator, commerce as a spiritual accelerator.
right. Right. Yeah, and it really does reveal a lot of blind spots. It makes me think of a potential pitfall of adopting sacred commerce as a personal platform or a way of like navigating, as if you're an entrepreneur or someone who's starting a business or even established in a large company and you're really skilled in that space. There's there's almost this temptation to almost take a path of self-righteousness at the same time, like, oh, oh, I'm practicing sacred commerce. And the truth is having worked in conventional business settings and also worked in a lot of spiritual publishing brands and a lot of different, really mission-based organizations, is that I've actually learned in some ways how to be a better business person from conventional business operators, because a there's a sense of best practices. There's a sense of how to operate in this world in a really civil way that sometimes in the cult of personality that can sometimes come along with um, these outrageous startups that are taking on the world, is that there can be a lack of accountability and things like that. I can't even count how many like conscious places I've been in that felt like it was just filled with distortion. So the pitfall is
I
like,
would
don't
argue
get hung
about
up.
them. Yeah, and I would argue with you about whether they were really conscious or not.
Right,
I think
right.
there's a lot of, pseudo spiritualism, and really, there is no such thing as a sacred commerce company. You can base your company on those principles, but it
Hmm.
is up to every single individual in that company to act on them. And nobody
Yes.
can make you. I can't make my colleagues, look at themselves first and take responsibility in that way. If they want to
Yeah.
blame me, there's nothing I can actually do about it to stop them, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in my, understanding of spirituality, if I notice myself blaming them, I'm going to talk to myself about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean I can stop them and talk to them about it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
very, sacred commerce is actually a very personal journey. And
Yeah.
it's for each of us to choose, because
Yeah.
it's for when you're ready for 100% responsibility. And 100% responsibility is hard, because shit happens like
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really tempting to blame and to, I mean, sadly, very sadly, I blamed Ayman a lot. And not
Mm.
only for our failures, but for our successes. And
Mm.
both are dangerous, because that meant I wasn't owning them. One
Right.
is actually not
Right.
really worse than the other. And the likelihood is, if you're doing one, you're doing the other. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
It's
like
just a
I'm going to go
pattern
like,
of
oh, the
blame.
success is mine, but the failures are
Right.
all yours. No, if I'm
Right.
blaming you in one area, I'm going to be blaming you in the other, you
Yeah.
know, because I'm perceiving myself as less powerful than you, you know.
Hmm.
So and I don't want to be responsible. Like
Yeah.
if I blame you, then you're the responsible one, you
Right.
know.
Right.
And it's interesting how, someone's absence can make you realize the extent of which some of the, of which you did some of those things, because you
Hmm.
suddenly have this kind of big reflective space you have to look at,
Right. Yeah. The spiritual
But
buck stops here. It's a can
right.
you
I
can
mean,
you talk about the inner balance sheet? Because that seemed like a really cool, fun metaphor to talk about how do I take these principles of self accountability and use the concept of a balance sheet in
yeah, that's
business.
such a beautiful thing to do. And we actually got the idea from Iman's extraordinary father, who I never had the pleasure of meeting. He was already in heaven. But by all accounts, he was an extraordinary man and extraordinary forward thinking man for his generation. He was the first Syrian man to go to Harvard. It was the year of 69, which was the first year that produced 100% millionaires. And so he really broke a lot of those abundance barriers, for a Middle Eastern man. And he was blatantly an extraordinary person, because in the 30 years that I was with Ayman, every time I met people that had known him, they would tell me stories about him as if it was yesterday. And he'd been gone like 7 years when I met Ayman. So this is like 10 and 20 and 30 years after his departure. And he
Yeah.
just touched so many people's lives. He was a very generous man, which I think Ayman just took on and, expanded
Hmm.
on. But the balance sheet was something that he did when he first went to Harvard. And we found it, only a few years ago when we were cleaning out one of his houses. And he had this, like, his liabilities, and it was like, his confidence and his, what do you call it? Poverty consciousness, not
Right.
feeling like,
Right.
and he had this
Like he
list
belonged
of
there,
things.
or wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the other side, he was confident, and he was, had a good mathematical brain and like all these things. And he would review it like once a month, like you would your accounting.
Right.
And so it came, and it was in the same book as his accounting, with a line down the middle, assets, liabilities. And he would just fill it in every month and then write a few notes about how those things had changed, and when, something managed to shift. And we were just like, whoa, this is amazing. And we, integrated it into our trainings, because it's
Yeah.
just such an important thing to do, to realize that actually your assets and liabilities are predominantly actually on the inside,
Yeah.
reflected, by the outer ones.
Yeah, it's a really cool tool. It's a really good metaphor. I mean, when you think about it, the whole of what we inherited as Christianity was a kind of um, merchant view of life, because I think a lot of the earliest conversions to Christianity were with Paul in Corinth. There's Paul. I think Paul was the teacher who was really kind of going out like. The church
Paul
apparently
Hawken?
was built. No, Paul the apostle. In terms of
Oh,
when Christianity
you're going
started,
old
like
time. Okay.
yeah, that was. I mean, that's where the kind of concept of like a debt. You have a debt, and God
Right.
paid the debt, and so it's we can get heavy handed with the metaphors, obviously, and but this is the idea of an inner balance sheet, is particularly if you have that kind of a mind that really likes to go down the list and track progress. That's a fantastic tool. And
Yeah, it really
s-
is. It's a beautiful
s-
tool.
so we've got this idea of the merchant priesthood, and it's a big one. And it's one of those things in the platform and in the teaching where you could actually share all of the tools, you could share all of the insights, without ever saying the merchant priesthood or talking about this history or hidden
True.
history, and but you would still have a really valid set of tools that you can operate with. Why do you think you want to reflect? Why do you think the merchant priesthood was so important for you and Ayman to include in the book and include in the teachings?
I think because so Ayman and I really met over business. Like we were both passionate entrepreneurs and really believed in business as a tool of change, as a potential catalyst to change and to improving humanity's experience. And we both had superfood companies at the time and were, feeding people green food in the hopes that they would, think more smartly with well-fed
Yeah.
brains and this kind of thing. And we worked together for months and months before we ended up getting together and subsequently getting married. And on our honeymoon, we went with Kevin Ryerson to Egypt, and we did the whole tour that I now lead people on. And in the Temple of Dendera, we met this god Bes. We have him right here, the old god Bes. There he is, and he's the god of commerce and the god of the merchant priesthood. And that's all we were told by the temple guards that, introduced us to this statue that we hadn't seen anywhere else. He pops up in Isis temple and in Dendera temple. He's not really at other places. And
Okay.
he's not like any of the other gods. He's this short, little, round, tongue hanging out, big smile, very happy kind of chap. And he was the god of commerce and the midwives. I
Hmm.
think we mentioned that in the first
Yes.
episode,
Yes.
how that was, a really important part of what he oversaw. And it just sparked such a chord in us both, because that is how we have thought of business, as this potentially super sacred act. And so when we caught up with Kevin, who is a medium and a trance channel, and one of the beings that he brings through is a merchant priest, the head of the merchant priests from the reign of Queen Hatshepsut. And so his name is Anton Ray. And Anton Ray just started telling us stories of this
Mm.
priesthood, and it really ignited and gave more form to our own passion. And we just started like integrating those ideas into our businesses, and over many, many years wrote the book Sacred Commerce. But it was just that it gave structure to something we were already so passionate about. And it's a lovely lyrical myth ritual,
Yes.
like it gives
Yeah.
it's enchanting
Yeah.
to know that there was a time when they made it such a sacred act, and that we could go there in our future.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk more about that, but I want to do a little side story. Uh, the guy that actually he's a graphic designer. His name is Dustin Byerly. He created this hat, this logo. He's
Mm-hmm.
a local guy. I'd known him for a couple of years, and I ran into him at some event several months ago and asked him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm working on this documentary and things like this. It's about my life, and I grew up in this really odd community, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And as an adult, I had all these questions, so I've created this movie." And it's funny because the community he grew up in was the one that Kevin Ryerson had connected with, and this was this community, one of the in San Diego. He would tour around and in Arizona, and so his mom and his father were part of this community, and we just met out of the blue here in Ojai, and
I love it.
you know
I had a quick look at the trailer for the movie. I can't wait for him to finish it so we can
oh, I
see the whole
watched
thing.
I watched the first cut the other day with him and his father, who's featured strongly in it, and I just can't wait for you to see it. It's fascinating. It's a very
Awesome.
personal
Awesome.
story. It's about one person's individual like exploration of like, what is this crazy stuff that happens around me and my family, and um But yeah, it's funny because, there's this undercurrent of people connecting. You either, some people will hear this and they'll be like, oh, what a load of horse shit. Like, this is business. We're going to go do stuff. And this is, we're going to do the
Yeah.
deals and yada, yada, yada. And you guys are crazy. And whatever gets you to sleep at night, I guess, is probably what they're thinking. And I probably think the same thing about them. But there are some people who hear this and they go like, whoa, you just reminded me of something. I just remembered something about myself. And this concept explains so much about me. And so I just want to learn more, and I'll learn it. I'll take the information from where it comes from. And if it's from someone who's channeled, as long as, there's somebody there's a consistency, there's plenty of evidence out there. Look into
Yeah.
the concept of channeling at ION's Institute of Noetic Science. They've got a lot of science behind why and how this kind of thing works. But what, let's dive more into the merchant priesthood. Like, I kind of want to go almost, even into things you may not have covered in the book. Like, what do you want to share about them? How do you connect with them? And do you have any of your own sense or memory of being alive during that time?
I do. And, I'm very lucky to have had Kevin Ryerson really kind of walk at our side in this journey. He's a big reason that the book even exists. He added so much and was always, doing channelings for us and sharing stories from the merchant priesthood. And there is actually extremely well preserved statues of Ayman and I back then when we were, you know, whatever, high up in the merchant priesthood as a merchant couple.
Wow.
And it's really interesting. I go and visit myself every time I'm back in Cairo.
Mhm.
And one time I was there, and they have these marble eyes, and those marble eyes were, said to hold all the information of that lifetime in them. And actually, there was one time when I saw her when I ended up like with sick as a dog by the end of that day. But it was like I went into this super healing place, and
Mhm.
I felt like, I mean, I felt her with me for like 2 weeks, just kind of downloading into me that lifetime. But what I was going to say was there was this other guide with another group, just passing by, and he said that we were known as the good people. That's, and which just really hit a chord with me because, as you know, in the book, we talk about beauty, goodness, and truth being the qualities of good leaders and being the
Yeah.
qualities of the new humans moving forward. And beauty, goodness, and truth is really at the core of every single one of us. It may
Yes.
just be distorted by shame and pain and, drama of this lifetime and other lifetimes. But to hear just a random guide say that as the one thing that he said about this couple, that they were known as the good people. And you can see it in them. They just, they, they did very, very well. Obviously, I think they were in the reign of Queen Hatshepsut. And the merchant priests, so it was really in her reign and she's the only woman pharaoh, and she really wasn't really supposed to be the pharaoh. She was the acting pharaoh on behalf of her stepson, who wasn't old enough to take the throne when his father died.
Right.
And she, in a very short period of time that she had before he took over, I mean, I think it was, I really should know this number, but it's something around 10 years, 10, 15 years. She
Mhm.
did so much that sadly he
Incredible.
kind of undid. But
Right.
it was the first and only time there's been a woman leading at that level. And she promoted the merchant priests to a level equal to her. And you can actually see in the temple drawings, when you see her and the merchant priests, they're not bowing to her, they're at her
Right.
level, and they're the
Interesting.
only people that are. And this concept of them being responsible for the peace and prosperity of the
Right.
nation
The servant
was what
leader.
Yeah, exactly. Is what they were really, really highly trained in. And that's why they trained so hardcore in emotional literacy, emotional alchemy,
Right.
because if you have those skills, then you really are an incredible diplomat. You can walk into any situation and you can bring it round because you're not only using your intellect, you're not only using your persuasion, but you're actually like, I mean, they had the ability to like suck in the energy of a
Right.
room, bring it into them and push it back out as something else. So they would literally diffuse resonance using their body chamber as the distillation, chamber to do
Yeah.
that. And so they would decide the outcome of a trade before walking into the marketplace by changing the resonance of the marketplace. They took responsibility at such a high level. And imagine if we do that, if we go to something and we decide the outcome before we go. I mean, I do that sometimes. I decide the
Yeah.
outcome before I go. I'll do that in concerts. I'll take all that incredible joy energy and I'll flow it into our work. Like
Yeah.
this is something we can do as modern day alchemists, because energy is just energy and it
Hmm.
needs to be used and channeled, but it's like learning how to direct it with goodness and with consciousness
Yes.
is what they did.
When you said, I definitely want to come back to that because we're getting into the practice. It's essentially what's come to us through the practices of magic and a lot of what you would call spiritual or metaphysical practice is really quite ancient and my comment around this has to do with you said Queen Hatshepsut. Sorry, you had to
Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut. All right, I'll get that someday.
It took
If
me
you're
years.
if you're listening and you have the same problem, just know that you're not alone. Um, Queen Awesomeness
Yes, exactly.
had 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 elevated the merchant priesthood to her level. And we're going to get into the history more of this, but I definitely want to jump ahead several hundred, maybe a couple thousand years, um, to when the Knights Templar got involved and they were bringing this insights into Europe. And what did they introduce into the European consciousness through the story of King Arthur, but King Arthur and the Round Table, where all of the other knights happen to be 12. There's a coincidence. Um, Elevated them all to his level. So this
Yeah.
was a kind of a servant leadership concept that had been in abeyance for in consciousness, just suppressed in consciousness for thousands of years probably, but then this information resurfaces and then, oh, what do we do with it? We're like, oh, we're going to put this in our stories. We're going to and it was quite subversive actually for them to be in their positions and create, just insert a whole storyline into the European consciousness that the king shouldn't be above everyone, but at the same level as his highest advisors, or her
Yeah.
highest advisors in the case of Queen Awesomeness.
I like her new name. That's excellent. Yeah, that's really true. That concept of being on the level and being on the round table, that is really the next time you see it in such an impactful way,
Right.
similar to during her reign. And it had a really similar effect. I mean, King Arthur charged them with the responsibility of creating peace in the world, in
Yes.
their world, in their region. And they didn't in that time do it so much by commerce, obviously, because at
Hmm.
that time it was really a majorly warring time. And so it
Right.
was really through diplomacy. And
Diplomacy
that
and literary, the tales of King Arthur, they really kind of transformed things. And
yeah,
the stories that the different knights are getting into, they're tackling major social issues. Like I
yeah,
think it's Sir Gawain or um, I'm not sure which one it was, but he comes up to this castle and it's the castle of the wounded king, and basically you get to see this play out, like what happens when you're living an inauthentic life and the kingdom goes to disarray, and then what happens when you start to live an authentic life.
Yeah.
Well, this storylines were inserted with intention into the European consciousness through these stories of King Arthur, and seeded out through the troubadour tradition. And it's just phenomenal that what you can do is small individual, quote unquote small individual or groups, when they're thinking dynamically, when they're feeling dynamically, can make such massive changes. So in terms of thinking and feeling, let's jump back into Egypt, into the merchant priesthood. And they were essentially performing a version of magic, a version of the quote unquote great work, but they were applying it. And they were using this, what you are sharing as a modality called emotional alchemy. And can you
Yeah.
talk about, like, kind of more of the mythopoetics of the merchant priesthood, and also the concrete tool set that is emotional alchemy?
Sure. So, I mean, the kind of fascinating thing about emotional alchemy is it's actually incredibly simple to do, and you can pretty much do it real time. But the reason they spent years in the temple getting there is because to get yourself in a way past your ego, is actually something that takes us all many years. And because that, like, you deal with your inner child, you deal with your adolescent, you deal with this, you deal with that, and it's like the voices that it uses just keep on changing until it's like tried from every angle, and you get used to every voice, and you have consciously been like, that's ego, called it out in all of those areas. And then it gets to the point where that voice never goes away, but you don't even have to listen to it because you know its words and you've faced it in that position, right? And that's kind of at the point where you can be real time, and someone can come at you with their greed or their jealousy or their wanting to control, whatever it is. And you've already played that out and faced that, and so you can just see it like you're reading a book, right? So to get oneself to that point where you can see with that kind of clarity, I mean, that's what was so beautiful about my husband. I mean, his sight was so clear, and if I came at him with, my bitch or my martyr or my, he would just call it with no judgment. This is the beauty of, people when they are genuinely awake. They can call you out and you don't feel judged. And even me, who's a 2, who's, my bottom line is pride, right? Like, so you can imagine when he first started calling me out, my pride was just like, no, I'm not. Who are you talking, and then he was so genuine and he busted my pride so many times, and I had to own it, that like within, I don't know, probably the first 5 years of our relationship, it just got to the point where I didn't have to, I could tell her to shut up, and I could take his feedback and just stop, And then I would say the last 25 years of our lives, I've just been integrating all those lessons because he would never let me get away with anything. And vice versa. I did the same for him,
Right.
But when you don't have that kind of somebody, right, really showing you your where your ego is playing you, basically, real time, it's, you gotta, I mean, you can totally do it on your own, but you've got to spend time in contemplation. And this is really why they spent all of those years in the temple before they were allowed out into the land. Because once they're out in the middle of, all the neighboring countries and Jordan and Sudan and wherever all around, like, if they mess up, then they can start a war, and lose the kingdom's, abundance.
Right.
because
Right.
they were carrying huge amounts of cash with them. So that's really what's so interesting in the timeline is it's that time to harness oneself. And the same thing, you know, King Arthur was harnessed by Merlin over many years. And then finally, when he became king, he had that clarity of mind to be able to pull those qualities out of his knights to be able to show them what they naturally had and have
Right.
them embody it for him as those pillars, you know, those pillars of integrity that make up chivalry. Um, and those pillars of goodness. You know, we in the
Yeah.
book we call chivalry goodness. We equate it with goodness because when you're a chivalrous person and you know, chivalry is not masculine. There's a lot of people that think of it as like just knights. No, you know,
Right.
anybody can be chivalrous. It's the ability to
Absolutely.
put someone to be loving to someone even if it's like out of your way, right?
Yeah. Well,
Like
the knight's counterpart is the dame. You know, that's the dame. You know, that's not. I mean, it's not like the 1950s. Them dames. It's basically the a
the lady.
dom and a the lady and the knight. They're held to the same standards of accountability and personal integrity and um slightly different applications, giving that window of time and space. But
Yeah.
essentially, they were the ones that the bar was set higher,
Yeah.
and the buck stops here in terms of energetic accountability and that
Yeah.
inner balance sheet and the taking it to the next level of don't have society track you and keep you in check. You're tracking your own ego dynamics and um you're watching your own back in a lot of ways.
Exactly. You're policing yourself. You've gone beyond the need to have an outside, you know, father figure tell you what's good and bad. You know, you have an inner barometer. And that takes maturity. It takes a lot of years of growing up, you know.
Yeah.
Um like there's very few people that grow up at 21. Usually it's 50, 55,
Right. Well, we've
40,
really lost
45.
that. As a culture, we're not really concerned about the whole person. We're concerned about the productive person, the person
Yeah.
who's going to feed the economy at one very specific level. And that's another piece of reintroducing sacred into everything is understanding that life and the whole arc of our experience is um, is an important part of that. And we have significant acts in our life. And, an adult, almost in our society, legally just means, oh, that's when you can go to war,
Yeah.
essentially. 18 is the draft. My God.
Absolutely. And applies to you,
In
you
law,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that your brain stopped fully developing. And I think we know that that happens around the age of 25. And a lot of
I
maturing
mean,
layers are
growing up
still
is
coming
like
on.
it's like a lifelong process. I don't
It
think
is
we ever
lifelong.
stop growing up. I mean,
Yeah.
I watched Ayman grow up in certain ways in the last year of his life that he'd, you know, never thought he'd get to.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
suddenly he did that one, you know, and
Yeah.
and that was a super conscious being
Mhm.
from like right when I met him. I mean, he was just, but the human condition pieces, they grew up a little bit
Absolutely.
every year, you know? It's,
Absolutely. And there's a kind of uh, what's it called, physiology to the soul, and there's a physiology to our physical form, and one kind of lives forever and the other one's finite. And so you can be absolutely super illuminated. I feel really illuminated at times. And then there's times when I like go, oh yeah, but my cells, this little animal self, monkey person,
yeah,
has been through a lot of trauma, through abandonment and poverty consciousness and choosing a career that's kind of like, it's, it's noble in some ways, but I can't support a family, and it's like there's a lot of things that kind of like that the animal self has to struggle with all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And being able to dance that dance between the two, um, while still owning my highest consciousness, still owning my soul identity. But a lot of my awakening has happened around, oh, now that I've got the soul identity, give my little self some love, like, pat him on the back and try to like use some of these principles of consciousness to help that little guy heal from the trauma and
Yeah.
be an even more stronger vehicle for the fullness of the soul that I've always been.
Yeah.
And these tools, I guess part of why I wanted you to dive a little bit more into the emotional alchemy piece is I want people to recognize it as almost like they've heard this before to a certain extent. Yeah, if you've ever like
Hmm.
taken a meditation class or taken a course on Buddhism or some sort of contemplative Christianity or any type of thing where you're going to the next level. In some ways, what you're offering through the emotional alchemy processes isn't different than what you can get. It's a path as legitimate as others. And when you get into any of these things, ultimately the mechanisms have to be understanding the difference between the ego, the little animal being, and the great soul being, how to let the soul being through to help us through our struggles. And, of the modalities that I've been exposed to and that you've been exposed to, I think we've both found that emotional alchemy has those basics, but it also just goes to the next level. Like it can grow with you to the very end of your whole life experience if you keep working it.
It's really true. And I think, Ayman in his lifetime was such a beautiful example of that. I mean, I watched that guy go through two major quantum leaps in his
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. And it was so interesting because, of course, it'd be reflected right back on me in terms of his ability to see through me. I would like
Yeah.
not only see it in him, but I would feel it because as somebody is more illuminated in themselves and sees the truth of their animal self, with
Mm-hmm.
less judgment and more clarity,
Yeah.
of course they see it in you. And
Mm-hmm.
you get to a very kind of crystal place in terms of your sight of what's going on in the interpersonal games, which are pretty much day in, day out with humanity. And it was very, very, I mean, it was just very beautiful to watch someone reach those levels of self knowing and levels of compassion with the animal self. There was things he took to the grave that he didn't sort out, but he was fine with it. He was like, I don't have to be
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
I didn't come here to
Yeah.
be perfect. Like
Yeah.
I've tried that before. It sucks. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So these
Well, it's a
tools
version. It's
do,
another version. Being perfect is another version of please love me condition, right?
right. Exactly. So true. So true. But yeah, these tools really do have that kind of ability to quantum leap you because you are just getting in there and transforming energy, and the energy is always what's real.
Yeah.
Things manifest from energy through our beliefs, through the functions, through, form is the last place they land. And I think that's where a lot of us get maybe slowed down and held up a little is we're trying to change the form, we're trying to change the relationship or the body or heal the body or this, but
Yeah.
actually, like, if we change the energy, all of that just automatically, like a little, domino
Yeah.
effect, changes and the
Yeah.
form remanifests like it has to
Well,
because the energy transformed.
and and the common denominator from lifetime to lifetime is the soul, and the soul
Yeah.
has residue. The soul has
Yeah.
energetic gifts, brilliance, and it also has energetic residue that it's going to
Yeah.
bring in. And you can, and yeah, the details of your life may be exactly what you say they are in
Yeah.
terms of their impact on you. And we were talking about this before, the excuses for being able to legitimately adapt martyrhood as a cloak of honor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, those people may actually be that way, but if your soul hadn't brought in a certain type of energetic residue, you wouldn't have been attracted to them. They wouldn't be attracted to you, and the whole conversation would be moot. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so there's a so there's a so we've been getting into more detail, which is really cool, and it's still a little abstract. So I want to go into as we're wrapping up our we're about yeah we I think we're going to end up about the same amount of time as we've been the last couple of times, about an hour and 15 minutes. And I think that what would be really cool is to drop down to another level around this thing called emotional alchemy and emotional intelligence. And Ayman had a very cool innovation that he brought to the conversation of emotional intelligence back when Daniel Goleman was starting to was making his Jonathan Goldman. That's right. Jonathan Goldman, right, was the emotional intelligence
No, that's
author back in the day, huh?
Daniel Goldman is the one that
The,
wrote Emotional Intelligence, the book. That's by that title is Daniel
right.
Goldman.
And then Ayman brought in the executive EQ, which was taking
Yeah.
principles and going to the next level with the business community. But he did something that others didn't in terms of the four quadrant dynamic of emotional intelligence. And, that was always
The
really
four cornerstones of emotional intelligence.
exactly. Can you go into that a bit? Because this really it's still abstract, but I think as listeners listen to this part here, you'll start to flesh out really kind of like what's the mechanics of emotional intelligence when you're talking about in the context of emotional alchemy.
Absolutely. And it is a step by step process, and the first quadrant is emotional literacy, and is really getting that language of like, okay, I'm angry. What is that telling me, right? If you're angry, that means something in your reality is not going as you expected or as you wanted. When you can translate that, it's a simple translation, it takes a second, but all of a sudden you're not gripped in the anger where you want to just go out and whatever, right? But you actually are like, oh, there's a message, and you can bring your conscious mind to like, okay, how can I change that so it is what I want in my life? And that literacy applies to every emotion. There's always
Mhm.
an underlying key message to each of them, and most of them do come back to anger, jealousy, and fear, because those
Mhm.
are the three root
Yeah,
emotions. And
the three
when you
roots, and then you've got all these variations, right?
right, so like anxiety is a form of fear,
Hmm.
like loneliness is a form of fear. Like, so they kind of relate back into those three, and in the emotional alchemy course we really just focus on those three, and of course love, the
Right,
primary emotion.
right,
So that kind of literacy quadrant is just really being able to like decode all of those and
right,
think of
right,
them as a raw energy versus like, oh my God, I'm so lonely. Like, and you're just stuck.
right,
You're just
right,
stuck in
right,
that bubble. It's like, oh no, this is a
right.
message, and I can move with it.
So the training says basically builds into it when you feel any emotion, you stop, you kind of pause, you take it in and you reflect, and then you essentially have a way of labeling that in a positive way. Like sometimes we can over label and it's a way of distancing
I
ourselves,
want
but
to
in
say
this
more
way,
like reading it, right? We call it
hmm,
reading. It's
got it,
like, you're
got
reading
it,
and writing. So you're reading what that is versus being just, embroiled in it, right? First you
got it,
get
got
embroiled
it,
in it, and then you pause, and then you read it, and then at
got
that
it.
point you have the ability to work with the energy within it. And so once you have your literacy, which really honestly doesn't need to take very long, you know,
Right.
to where you're recognizing those things with that like message coming with it.
Yeah.
Then
Instantly, it's kind of like a knee
it's,
jerk,
yeah,
oh, this is what's happening. Yeah.
exactly.
And that takes training. We don't do it automatically, not in our culture.
No. Well, it takes knowing what the messages are, but they are quite ABC, you know, the messages are
Hmm.
quite like the
Right.
same messages again and again and again coming from different
Right.
quadrants. But so then you move
Yeah.
on to your emotional fitness, and your emotional fitness is all about building exactly that, the emotional muscle to be like, oh, I'm angry again. That means there's something else happening that I don't like in my
Right.
reality. Let me respond to it.
Right.
And, you know, and if you're an anger type, it might happen to you 10, 20, 30 times a day, you know. But
Yeah.
every time you take responsibility for it and recognize it as something that's happening in a way that you don't like, you start making decisions of like where you want your life to turn based on the fact that it's not happening in the way you want, right? So
Right.
that
Right.
message, if you're living an inauthentic life, might be coming at you like many, many, many times a day. But as you
Yeah.
read it and read it and read it and you build that fitness muscle, you're like, wow, I need to start dreaming up a new life for myself. You know,
Right.
because
Right.
I'm not happy with the one I'm in, and this is my life. This is my one great life. Like, what do I want with it, right? So that
Yeah.
fitness piece is obviously ongoing, just the same as physical fitness. You don't want to get to the point where
Yeah.
you stop doing it because the body decomposes just as the same as the mind will if you stop with your emotional, you know, fitness. And then you have the ability at that point to go into your emotional depth, which is really your personal depth. And your personal depth is really where you find out much more of your grace in this lifetime, your gifts, your self values, you know, your self confidence, your self esteem, your self worth. They all start really coming alive in that place of emotional depth because you're no longer
Yeah.
pulled here and there by your emotions like a tree in the wind.
Hmm.
You're,
Yeah.
you know, you can go in and you can own that those your grace. You know, what's your grace? Like,
Yeah.
what is it? What do you do that is so easy for you? It just flows from you in a way that it doesn't from other people. And
Hmm.
everybody has things like that. But a lot of times we don't recognize them because they are so easy for us. You know, we can just do
Right.
them like as if we were walking down the street. We don't even notice them. But the people that are touched by that do. But when we get into our depth, then we can start to own those, and then we can do them with even greater impact, you know, because
Hmm.
they are easy by nature. If it's your grace, it's something that is easy for you to do. But you find
Yeah.
out what that is in your depth. And then once you've, you know, gone into your depth, that's when you come round to the fourth quadrant, which is to become an emotional alchemist. And really the difference between being an emotional alchemist and an emotionally literate person is at the level of emotional alchemy, something really super intense can happen and you can transform that energy in the moment, in the middle of the marketplace. I mean, that's, you know, the ultimate
Right.
example because that's what the merchant priests were trained to do. You know, they can have people rush in and try and steal everything, and they can just go in, transform that energy of greed and barbaricness, and like
Yeah.
diffuse it and send back out love, and you know, actually
Yeah.
alchemically change the resonance of the marketplace. And that's the
Yeah.
same for any of us in our lifetimes. You know, I mean, Ayman would often, you know, just take a bathroom break and go and do an alchemy meditation in 2 seconds in the bathroom and come back into the meeting, and boof, his energy would be different and he would be able to get a different outcome from the partners that were, you know, traumatized because of the LA earthquake or whatever it was, whatever, you know, he
Right.
would be able to be responsible for that fear coming at him and just be like, yeah, but that's not where we're going to make the decision from. I'm going to make the
Right.
decision
Right.
from a higher level. I'm going to take that
Yeah.
into a concern and have compassion, you know? And that's the beauty of being able to be an alchemist. And in many ways, it's just taking ultimate responsibility for your reality. That's an alchemist is in that position of like I'm I'm not a victim. I'm 100% responsible. Yes, it's a paradox. There's other people involved, but I'm going to take responsibility for the outcome.
Yeah, it's the same level of self responsibility and self awareness that you find at the top of all the key practices. I mean,
Yeah,
that is the goal,
yeah,
ultimate emotional regulation. They
yeah,
even we even have a word now in therapeutic circles to speak to that in more clinical terms, which is to be able the ability to self regulate
yeah.
is the way I hear that, which
It's
is
very clinical.
yeah, it's very clinical. But it's funny because that's where you see how a lot of what's been psychologically sound has been held within the purview of spiritually sound. Like the idea isn't that you know if you're the spiritual master that you're all of a sudden this unaccountable person that it does whatever they want and snaps fingers and little jewels appear and it's kind of like a magic genie image of a guru when really I think it's the person who's ultimately the most accountable. I
Yeah,
think of some of your um like the Dumbledore character of the Harry Potter films has a very in books has this sense of he had a regular life, he had troubles. There was the whole like Grindelwald years and this was a normal human being, but after, a few decades of, giving it a go here and struggling with the ego, there's almost this sense of, yeah, I still get perturbed, but it's not the same sort of things that perturbed me, before I was doing this work. And it makes me think of the Four Cornerstone model in terms of an ideal society. How would we instruct people? And I think of like the first cornerstone is the first decade of life. And it's not like you divide it up that distinctly, like they're always touching each other. But the
yes.
first decade of life is when I focus and major on emotional literacy. The second decade is when I'm in my teens and I'm getting a lot more dynamic and I'm developing this dynamism that's inherent in the second cornerstone. And then in the third cornerstone of what's that, the
Emotional depth.
of the depth, in your 30s, you're having, and hopefully they're not happening earlier, but you can probably have some of the biggest upsets, the biggest breakups. It can be hugely impactful if somebody dies that you've known your whole life at the age of 30, and like just everything can almost like hit a little harder too. And then in to start learning alchemy in the 40s, it almost feels like you could learn alchemy when you're two. You could probably come in doing stuff, but what's the likelihood that people are going to be really have the emotional depth to be drawing with the emotional content that an emotional alchemist is actually working with? That, and I don't mean to say like that it has to be divided that way. I just thought that was an interesting way to look at it. Like if we were
That's
trying to design
definitely a natural kind of a natural progression. And like you said, it is ultimately, it's a spiral and you
mm-hmm,
dive in and out of it at different points. And,
right,
very often, you know, we had Aslan, just, not long after printing the first edition of Sacred Commerce. And in the book, we talk about the drop of joy technique, which is, a kind of a pocket emotional alchemy technique. And Aslan came into our lives, and we called him our drop of joy because,
mm,
from the minute
yeah,
he arrived, it was so hard to stay in a bad resonance around this guy because he was just always effervescent and happy and sprinkled
oh,
joy everywhere,
yeah,
as almost all children do. They are incredible alchemists in a way, but they're doing it without conscious direction. And so what
yeah,
happens as you get into your into your wisdom years, is that you can really start to consciously direct it and to be responsible for your community and your loved ones in a way that you couldn't before. And
Yeah.
because of your resonance, they can be okay. You don't have to even teach them. You can just
Right.
decide, okay, you can't hold this yet. I'm gonna pull this one through for you, and you go in and do your magic, and nobody even knows, you know.
I love the drop of joy technique for two reasons. One, because it's such an elegant technique in and of itself. It's really cool. I love for you to describe it in a minute here. And then the other one is like when I learned the drop of joy technique from the book, it illustrated the way the energies go from hyper concentrated laser like in the form of, say, anger, and then expands out into the same energy, but in its more expanded state that we would call passion.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I didn't even think of one as like well, it'd been I had gone down the path of emotional literacy several, years before in terms of like, how does it help me, like, just, stop myself? Like, emotional literacy is present in a lot of modalities.
Yeah.
You guys take it to a whole other level with emotional alchemy, whole other level. Like, I'd never heard anything like, oh, it's not good or bad. It's what we call this energy when it's in its most constricted state, and it's what we call this energy when it's its most expanded. And maybe we should just wrap up on that drop of joy technique so people can really understand the dynamics of emotional alchemy and how these things go from the concentrated to the expanded to the concentrated.
I think that's a beautiful ending. And in the show notes, you can drop a link into Ayman guiding you through it. Um,
Okay,
that
great,
we have up. So that'll be
great,
nice. Then people can do their own emotional alchemy at home. So the drop of joy technique actually came from Kevin Ryerson from Anton Ray in
great.
Egypt on one of our journeys off. I think it was the journey we took in '99, and it's where you go into a meditation, and it's a very quick. You don't even have to count yourself down, but you just go right deep inside yourself, and you conjure an emotion at will. So depending on what emotion you're wanting to have happen in your reality, quite often it's passion, because it's like you want to finish a project, or you want to find a funder, or you want the passion to go that extra mile, right? But sometimes it would be compassion. You want to conjure some compassion. You're really just, in that state where you could do with a little compassion. So whatever it is that you're choosing, you're kind of looking at what you're wanting to create in the expanded version. And then you're going in and you're taking the dense version. So let's do passion as the example. So you want more passion. You're doing this project and it's been going good, but you're kind of like tired of it. It gets some of our projects go on for too long, and like that energy to get them finished starts waning. And so when you want to reinvigorate yourself, you close your eyes and you call on a memory of intense anger, super, super intense anger. So it's something where you literally, were ready to punch someone's lights out. You were furious. And the minute you think of it, those energetic hormones that the brain makes when you're that angry start like secreting, because you're remembering the intensity of your fury, and it's like it starts vibrating in you. And then you drop that memory and you put it on the side. Just drop it. And then you bring in a memory of really intense joy. Same thing, something when you're just on fire, in ecstasy, like top of the world. And you just remember all of that, beauty and like ecstasy and excitement and wonder and all the things that happen when you're in a heightened state of joy. And those chemicals start dropping in your brain. And those chemicals then go together, and that is what creates the passion, because the anger energy is a lot of dense, useful, active, like I want to punch somebody, like force, right? So that's why you want to conjure that force, and then you want to harness it by the expansive energy, the joy, so that force can go out, passion. And and then
Yeah.
you put the joy on the side and you open your eyes. I mean, you can do it in 5 minutes. It's not a long.
Yeah.
What is absolutely key is the intensity of your conjuring. And so
Yeah.
before you even close your eyes, just you think, what's the thing that made me the maddest? Got it. Okay.
Right.
What's the
Yeah.
thing that just made me the happiest? Boof, got it. And then you go in and feel them one after the other.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see why this is, yeah, it only takes 5 minutes plus the 10 years you took getting up to that point to be able to like do. And that's why this training is so important, because it's the simple but not easy principle of, oh yeah, I'll just think of this thing, and it's not going to re-trigger me,
Yeah.
by thinking it. Like there's this a whole other level of mastery that you just don't get to bypass the steps before to be able to do this. And whether you're doing it through pardon me, Buddhist practice, or yogic practice, or emotional alchemy, which has a lot of the same breath work and meditative tools around it, you are essentially becoming a more centered and present person. And it's not necessarily the way we just orient to naturally in our society without this extra support, without this extra help,
Yeah.
to get us through our animal instincts and our trauma responses and triggers and fight, flight, fawn responses that are really become much bigger than a podcast you listened to a week ago or something. Like, these are, you got to get up, you got to go to the gym, so to speak, of these mental workouts,
Yeah, the
these
fitness
emotional
piece is
workouts,
essential. It
the
really is.
fitness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
people are always like, oh, well, your ego's always going to have something to say. Well, of course it is. It's going to live inside. You don't kill the ego, because the ego is
Right.
super important. It's your sense of self. The positive ego is, super important to your life. But you definitely do get to the point where the volume on it is low enough that you barely have to listen to it. It's always going to say it. It's always going to have the comment. You're never going to get to the point where it's not like, really, you're going to do that? What kind of an idiot would do that? You hear it somewhere down there, but it's like so many levels down. It's like, you you don't have to respond to it at all. Basically,
Yeah.
you just know what it said, and you're like, yeah, I don't believe you. I know more. You know.
We know more. So we do have a training that's just starting. I don't think when this drops, it's going to be the full moon. I think the course will have started, but it won't be too late to join, because it's pretty self-directed with some
No,
group
if you're gonna
check-ins.
join, you're gonna join the next one. If you want to do it
Okay.
on the guided one, because everybody's already started.
Okay, so then go ahead, and if you're interested in this work and you want to learn more, check out sacredcommerce.com. Get on our waiting list for the next emotional alchemy course. We just left the train station with this one,
Yeah.
and really excited. And yeah, any final words from you, Rowan, on all this?
I don't think so. I think the next one we probably might run one over the summer. But yes, if people are interested in being on the next one, best thing is to head over to the Sacred Commerce training page and just get on our mailing list.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool. Maybe
But
I'll
thank you. That was
close
a
this.
great look into everything.
Nice, yeah, yeah. I think so too. We've got a really good start on the book. And I did want to share this little definition that you all wrote in Sacred Commerce and the Fourth Bottom Line. Sacred commerce is the participation of the community in the exchange of information, goods, and services that contributes to the revealing of the divine, beauty, goodness, and truth in all, and where the bottom line is your spirituality. And he liked to spell participation. Oh my God, what is it with me and talking today?
Participation.
He spelled it party, Party, because it should be fun. It should be uplifting. Its participation is a joyful experience, and commerce can be a joyful, interesting, uplifting, and rewarding experience.
Yeah.
If you approach it with a light heart, serious intention, obviously, it's all still dollars and cents. We're still dealing in the real world, but there's a way to do it that uplifts yourself and uplifts others. And Rowan is really so well equipped to help you get there in a good way.
Oh,
Thank
bless
you, Rowan.
you. Thank you, Immanuel.